But that leads nicely into then reaching 2050 as the standards and the goals we're now setting and legislatively setting for us as an industry to achieve. There's big debates going on in some of the governmental organisations in Ireland, for example, public authorities, about the targets that we need to achieve. Like 2030, from our perspective, is gone, I'm afraid. We're not reaching 2030. That's gone.
I agree.
And so the bigger question becomes, are we in a position to actually be capable of reaching 2050 when we talk about these goals that we are setting? And the way you mentioned a minute ago, how slow our industry is moving currently, that is going to, we will need to ramp up exponentially over the next 2 decades in order for us to be able to remotely achieve those targets.
I mean, I think it's a multifaceted problem. I mean, there's not if there was a singular thing that we could do, it would be great. But so let's start with the labor challenge and not getting enough people in. The only gap to fill labor is tech.
Yeah.
So tech needs to step in. And we have some amazing technology, and more technology is being produced all of the time, right? So if we're lacking people, we have to shift to technology. That's the only investment, but that requires investment and that willingness to invest. So that's one. I think one of the biggest ones, and one of the easiest ways potentially we could get close to 2030 is forgetting all the new material stuff for a moment, which we'll touch upon. And part of my day job is kind of thinking about, well, how productive is construction?
Yeah.
And if I've got a scary statistic. So according to the Australian government, the labour productivity of construction since the introduction of BIM in the mainstream in 2010 has actually fallen by 15%.
Which is a bit,
so they're 15% less productive in construction in Australia. That's bizarre. Yeah. And I saw it and I was like, and I haven't found another source, but it is from the Australian government. So I'm like, okay. In the UK, they've only increased productivity by 5%.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, why is that? Like what's really holding us back? And it's the collaborative part of the construction. So there's a lot of companies and a lot of people talk about this when we think about how much waste comes off of site and just how much time, money, and physical waste that we do. And at the end of the day, like clients right now, governments, private sector, all they want is a building on time, on budget, and to the quality that they kind of set to pay for.
Yeah.
And construction does amazing things. Like we build stuff from nothing to something.
Yeah.
But we've kind of failed a lot on these things.
Yeah.
And there's kind of, I call it kind of fag packet or kind of napkin math around it. Where they're saying, well, if you solve your time and your waste, you can actually reduce CO2, global CO2 emissions by around 2%.
Yeah.
Just by that. Not making mistakes, delivering stuff on time. It's that inefficiency. But it's like that because like on average, you've got 13 companies on site at any one time.
Yeah.
You know, a material has to move around the site 7 times before it's installed. So it gets broken, gets lost. Yeah. You know, someone takes it home. You know? Yeah.
Crazy.
It's a very complex industry.
Yeah.
And so like, I know people going, oh, we can move to offsite and pre-manufacturing. Like, absolutely you can, but still every single project is unique because the site's unique. Yeah. And therefore you're going to have this complexity.
There's certain typologies that off-site manufacturing or MMC, modern methods of construction, will facilitate, like housing, hotel, hospital, the bed units in hospitals, et cetera, absolutely we'll be able to do it. But there's some unique capital projects where we won't be able to go fully off-site on. And, you know, but I think there's a place for all solutions. I think there isn't a one solution is going to fix all our problems. I think it's an amalgamation of all solutions working efficiently. We will see huge impacts in our industry, both from a sustainability perspective, but efficiency, cost, time, quality, all of that kind of stuff.
If we stop doing stupid stuff, we'd probably get about 30% over the way there.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the most politest of ways, of course.
Yeah.
The other part is then you look at like the materials part, the supply chain.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to basically restructure an entire supply chain with new materials. Yeah. And just like I was speaking to a couple of people running projects in London currently, and the client was like, I want to use low carbon concrete. Yeah. I want to use that. I've got sign off, so insurance, got sign off from the insurance guys. money people. It's like, cool. But that will delay your project by 14 months.
Yeah.
Because the supply chain's
not there yet
at that volume.
Yeah.
And it's like SSAB in Sweden going, we can create low carbon to near zero carbon steel. Okay, cool. But how much can you produce? It's one foundry.
Just one. Yeah.
So it's great. It's fantastic. But this stuff will take a decade or so to ramp.
That's the reality.
So how do you invest, or how do governments invest into making that happen faster? I don't have the answer to that, really.
I think you need to do it all at the same time. Yeah. Everything needs to be moving in that same direction, using alternative solutions, setting up the supply chains to provide greener alternatives, whether it's steel or concrete. The steel and concrete thing will, because of the volumetrics, will help our industry greatly. But I think the efficiency part is surely something we can solve. Like, that's decision making, we have planning and so on. Surely we can solve that before we start looking at alternative materials and so on. But as I say, we need to be doing it all right now.
Everything needs to be done.
As well as trying to attract new people into the industry, upskilling the current industry. Like, it's really so much that is changing and happening right now and over the next number of years. Unprecedented, I would say.
Well, it's also because I think the industry does get a pretty bad rap. I mean, it's very negative. I mean, if you just watch mainstream news, it's kind of like project delayed, project over budget. Yeah. Interestingly, though, no one on the news talks about how bad construction is in terms of global warming, though, compared to like aviation or fashion or those other industries. I think the real interesting change, one of the big, I think, we talk about 2050. What we're starting to see, and it's actually an area which, surprisingly, a lot of people don't really think about, is the finance part. And I'm not a finance guy, but what we know is that big pension funds, the people that borrow the money, loan the money, out to buildings so they can be built, they all of a sudden now have this ESG, these green, these clean requirements, especially the pension funds. Yeah. Because the people who are having their pensions, like myself, will go into my pension fund and clean it. As soon as that money starts going, it needs to be greener. And that's the push, because now there's no choice. As an industry, we have to. If we can't achieve that, we're not even going to get the building off of the ground.
No, exactly.
So I'm starting to see a lot more of that. And that's
it's interesting you mentioned, we were talking about it in a presentation we were given at a conference last week in Dublin, and saying what were the biggest impacts between now and 2030. And one of ours we were discussing was green financing. Yeah. The reality is that because of the ESG reporting, as you say, the companies at the top financing the entire industry are going to need to invest in green buildings, because of the simple fact it's now their supply chain. In the similar sense where contractors and the suppliers were going to be looking at green material, because that's going to affect the requirements that they need to deliver upon within these greener buildings. So the entire supply chain from the top down is going to be affected. And it's maybe the first time where we're going to see a top-down approach to this rather than a bottom-up. If we were to wait for the bottom-up, it might never happen. So it needs to be the top-down, and money talks at the end of the day, doesn't it? This
is the stick incentive, right? And this goes back to what we were discussing earlier as well, which is if we're being asked to do these things, we also now have to evidence it, that it's been achieved, which means now we have to go and measure stuff, which means we need data, which means we need tech, which means we need skills.
And skills,
So it trickles through pretty quickly, because people will start bidding for these contracts.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then, the requirement be, okay, you need to prove that you've achieved, X kilograms per square meter, whatever that target is that's been set.
Yeah.
People bidding will look at that and go, how do I do that?
Yeah. What's my strategy here?
Where do I start? And this is where zero comes in, right? As a community, we have people doing this today, and we have people who are not doing this today. And us as a community are going, well, okay, go and speak to that person. These people are really good with tech. Like, it's that kind of wayfinding, arrow finding kind of group.
And the thing about the sustainability aspect, it's the one area where every single stakeholder group is going to be affected.
Yeah.
Everybody will need someone in their organization to be able to talk about, manage, strategize, deliver on their proportion of this, because no one is going to be able to step back and say, oh, this is not my responsibility. The reality is that from the client right through the stakeholder group, right through the supply chain, everybody is going to have to deliver something of information.
Even the simplest thing of electrician on site saying, I've installed that light fitting.
Yeah.
Has to now be done because we have to time check everything. We have to go, well, is it the thing we asked you to install? Yeah. Because we've carbon counted that light.
That EPD for that particular light fitting.
So it all goes through. It's just the simplest of that.
Yeah.
Multiply that by the thousands, tens of millions of checks that you have to do now.
Yeah.
It's
a bit serious.
It's serious, but at the same time, it's exciting because it is a big challenge to solve. And I mean, you work in this kind of field as well. And we're going to see a very fast change, not very fast because it's still construction. A fast change.
Yeah.
Because now we have this huge catalyst.
Yeah. And right now we can see that all public listed companies, and this includes investment funds or whatever, now need to report on their ESG next year, on their 2024 return, if you like. So what's that going to look like as all companies are brought into the system? It's going to be super interesting to see how quickly an industry can change because of a requirement. Again, if we were left up to our own devices, we probably would have been, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wait and see if another company does it, or wait and see if actually it's even going to be required. Like I would argue, BIM level 2 in the UK was the same kind of outcome. Standards were set; they weren't really enforceable. It was a kind of a suggestive approach to it, and people went, let's see if someone takes it up before I take that first step. Whereas now we're seeing companies have to, from a legal perspective, to report in this way. So the impact here is going to be super interesting, and the outcome.